I was sipping my coffee, going through the stack of mail that had accumulated over the week, when I spotted a thick envelope with the words Greater Hillside Homeowners Association emblazoned across the front. I groaned inwardly. Another one of their routine letters, no doubt. But as I tore open the envelope, something about the tone of the letter made me pause. It wasn't a friendly reminder or a simple newsletter. Instead, the letter was a formal notice demanding that I make a series of changes to my property. It listed everything from improper landscaping to unsuitable exterior decorations. According to them, my mailbox was too old-fashioned, my rose bushes too wild, and my front yard, though I'd always considered it charming, was apparently not up to their standards. The final straw was the last line. Failure to comply with these demands will result in fines, potential legal action, and mandatory inspection of your property by the Greater Hillside HOA enforcement team. I laughed, shaking my head. I wasn't the type to be pushed around, especially by a group of so-called community enforcers. I had spent years as a crime scene investigator, dealing with real threats, real criminals, and the most intense situations you could imagine. The last thing I was worried about was a group of homeowners trying to tell me what to do with my yard. I wasn't going to let some HO bully me into making pointless changes to my home. I tossed the letter in the trash and went back to my morning routine. After all, I had been through enough real investigations to know that this was nothing more than a nuisance. Or so I thought. Little did I know this was just the beginning. I thought ignoring the letter would make the issue go away, but I was wrong. Days turned into weeks, and then another letter arrived. This one was thicker, with more official-looking paperwork and a clearer tone of threat. The HOA wasn't just asking anymore. They were demanding compliance. The letter accused me of ignoring previous communications and warned me that unless I fixed the supposed violations, I would face an escalating set of fines. The list had grown: a broken fence post, improperly maintained lawn, though it was just a bit more rustic than the sterile, manicured lawns of my neighbors. And now they were adding additional violations for things like unapproved decoration on front porch, my grandmother's old rocking chair. I couldn't believe it. The more I read, the angrier I got. It felt like they were trying to micromanage every aspect of my life. They even had the audacity to attach photos of my property, clearly taken without my permission, showing areas they deemed unfit. I threw the letter down, muttering under my breath, "This is ridiculous." But it didn't end there. The very next day, I found someone walking around my yard. They were taking pictures, inspecting everything, looking at the fence I had damaged, a piece of wood that had come loose in a recent storm, and jotting down notes. I approached them, my suspicion growing. "Can I help you?" I asked, walking up with purpose. The person, dressed in khakis with a clipboard, looked up, clearly surprised that I had noticed. "I'm here on behalf of the Greater Hillside HO," they said in a stiff, rehearsed tone. "We're conducting a property inspection based on your violations." I shook my head, refusing to let them push me around. "I never agreed to any inspection. You're trespassing on my property, and you can leave now. I'll deal with the HOA directly." The person hesitated for a moment, glanced at their clipboard, and said, "Well, we'll have to report this. If you don't comply, things will get worse." Before I could say anything more, they turned and walked off, leaving me standing there, furious. I wasn't going to let this go. I knew they were trying to escalate things, but I wasn't backing down. I wasn't just any homeowner. I had the skills to investigate, and I was going to find out who these people really were and what they were trying to pull. The encounter with the inspector had left me on edge, but I wasn't about to let it go. This was no ordinary HOA problem. It felt personal now. I decided to take matters into my own hands. The next morning, I went over my security footage from the previous day. I had cameras set up around my property, mostly for safety, but now they would serve a different purpose. I scrolled through the footage, looking for any signs of tampering or unusual behavior. And then I saw it. The figure who had walked around my yard, clipboard in hand, only it wasn't just a casual inspection. The footage clearly showed him approaching my backyard fence, bending down and doing something with his hands. He fiddled with the wood in a way that didn't look accidental, pulling a piece of the fence loose and making it appear as though it had been damaged. I watched it again, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline. It was no accident. This person had deliberately staged the violation to make it seem like I had caused the damage. They were setting me up. I pulled out my phone and snapped screenshots of the footage. The evidence was damning. I knew what I had to do next, expose the fraud, but I couldn't do it alone. This wasn't just about standing up to an HOA anymore. I had been targeted, and now I was going to turn the tables. I grabbed my phone and called a few trusted people. As a former crime scene investigator, I knew how to handle a situation like this. I needed backup, and I needed to dig deeper into the HOA's actions. It wasn't just about some petty violations anymore. There was a larger conspiracy at play. Someone was using this HOA as a cover for something more corrupt. The first person I called was an old colleague, an experienced investigator I had worked with on several high-profile cases. "I've got a job for you," I said when he picked up. "I need you to dig into the HOA. Something's off, and I think they're behind a scheme to force people out of their homes." He didn't hesitate. "I'll get on it. You just focus on your end, and we'll get to the bottom of this." With that, I felt a little bit of relief. I was finally on the right track, and now I just had to figure out how deep this went and who was behind it all. With the suspicion that I was being set up, I knew the next logical step was to gather concrete evidence, not just about the HOA's bogus accusations, but about who was truly pulling the strings behind all of this. I wasn't about to let anyone manipulate or ruin my life without fighting back. I spent the next few days carefully documenting everything I could. I re-examined the footage from my security cameras, taking notes on every detail. I wanted to be thorough. Anything out of the ordinary could be key. As I pored over the footage, I realized something. This wasn't just a random act of vandalism. The way the man moved, the way he positioned the camera to catch the damaged fence, it was all staged. Whoever was behind this had planned it. I took a walk around my property, taking notes of any other potential violations that could be planted. I examined my mailbox, the garden, and the roof line, anything that could be used against me. Everything seemed fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I reached the edge of my yard, I noticed something odd, a small surveillance camera, barely noticeable in the trees just beyond the fence. It hit me like a cold rush of water. They had been watching me, probably for weeks, setting up these fake violations. They weren't just targeting me, they were targeting everyone in the neighborhood, using surveillance to catch minor infractions and then turning them into false charges. I snapped pictures of the hidden camera, documenting its location, and made sure to grab a few angles of the fence damage. I also took notes on the time and date when the camera was likely active, cross-referencing it with the footage of the inspector tampering with the fence. Later that night, I used my connections to retrieve all the records I could on the HOA, property ownership, meeting minutes, and legal filings. It didn't take long to uncover that the HOA had recently been involved in several shady real estate deals, including land acquisitions in the area. The truth was starting to form a clearer picture. The HOA wasn't just an overzealous neighborhood organization. They were trying to force residents out to flip properties for massive profits. I called my old colleague again. "I've got everything. The HOA is involved in something bigger than I thought. This isn't just about violations. This is a scheme to seize properties and sell them off for development. They've been using fake enforcers, like the ones who came to my house, to intimidate and force people to sell." He paused for a moment, digesting what I'd told him. "You're on the right track. We'll make sure we expose this, but you need to get that evidence to the authorities soon." I agreed, knowing I was dangerously close to exposing something much larger than I'd ever expected. The fake police force, the tampered evidence, the shady land deals, it was all connected, and it was time to bring it to light. With the evidence mounting and the truth about the HOA's tactics starting to unfold, I knew the next step was to confront the fake HOA police directly. I couldn't let them continue to manipulate and intimidate me or anyone else without pushing back. I had been gathering evidence, but it was time to expose them. I reached out to Rick, the old investigator I had called earlier, and shared my plan. I'm going to confront them. I have everything I need to expose them as frauds, but I need to face them head on. I can't let this go on any longer. Rick agreed, and we arranged to meet in person the following day. Armed with the photos of the tampered fence, the surveillance footage, and the findings about the HOA's involvement in shady real estate deals, we were ready to confront the enforcers who had tried to break me. The next morning, I stood at my front gate, waiting. My pulse was steady, my mind clear. This wasn't about just proving they had staged the violations. It was about making sure no one else had to endure the same kind of intimidation I had faced. As I watched, I saw the familiar black SUVs roll up to my property. This time, it wasn't just one or two men. It was a full team, and they were wearing dark tactical gear. The leader, the same man who had been at my gate before, stepped out first. He didn't look surprised to see me waiting for him. Instead, he smirked, clearly thinking he had the upper hand. "We're not here to play games, Judge," he said, his voice low and threatening. "This is your final chance to comply. Step aside, or we'll make things more difficult for you." I didn't flinch. "You've already made things difficult for me," I replied, my voice steady. "You're not police officers. You don't have a warrant, and you have no right to be on my property. And as for the supposed violations, you've been caught red-handed planting evidence." I handed him the photos of the fence, along with the timestamps of the tampering on my security footage. "You've been setting me up, trying to force me into selling my property. I know about the fake police force you've been using to intimidate residents. And I know about your involvement in real estate scams, using the HOA as a front to seize properties for developers." The leader's face twisted into a mask of rage. He took a step forward, but I didn't back down. I stood firm, holding my ground. "You don't scare me," I continued, the confidence of years spent investigating and solving real crimes in my voice. "You're not above the law. And I want to make sure everyone knows what you've been doing." I pulled out my phone, showing him the hidden camera footage of their activities, as well as the documents I had gathered proving the HOA's corrupt practices. The leader's expression changed from anger to panic as he realized the full extent of what I had uncovered. "You're done," I said, now fully in control of the situation. "This ends today." With that, I turned to my phone and sent everything to the local authorities. Within minutes, the sheriff's office was on their way. They had no choice but to act. The fake police were exposed, and the HOA's entire fraudulent operation was about to come crashing down. As I stood there, watching the fake officers retreat, it felt like a small victory. But I knew the battle wasn't over. I had confronted the fake police, exposed their fraudulent behavior, and contacted the authorities, but I still needed to uncover the full extent of what the HOA was really up to. It wasn't just about false accusations and property violations, it was about something much larger. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd only scratched the surface. There were pieces of the puzzle still missing. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how coordinated the HOA's actions had been. These weren't just random thugs. They were professionals, hired to carry out a well-planned scheme. I dug deeper into the HOA's records and property files. My old crime scene investigator instincts kicked in. I wasn't going to stop until I found the answers. I started to trace the ownership of properties in the area, looking for patterns in their acquisition. And that's when I stumbled upon something truly unsettling. The HOA wasn't just targeting individuals. They were systematically forcing homeowners to sell, using intimidation and fraud to clear the way for redevelopment projects. I found several properties in the neighborhood that had been sold at a fraction of their value, all to a group of investors who had been working closely with the HOA. In some cases, the sales were made after fake violations had been discovered on the property, leading to the residents either paying exorbitant fines or feeling forced to sell. The more I uncovered, the more it became clear the HOA wasn't just an overzealous neighborhood association. They were part of a massive real estate scheme, one that used fake violations and their fake police force to seize homes from unsuspecting residents, all for the benefit of wealthy developers looking to buy up property cheaply and redevelop the land for profit. I knew I had to bring this to the authorities immediately. This wasn't just a local issue anymore. It was a full-blown conspiracy that needed to be stopped. But I couldn't do it alone. I called my old colleague, Rick, and filled him in on what I had discovered. "This is bigger than I thought," I said, my voice tense with the realization of just how deep the corruption ran. "They've been using fake police officers to run a real estate scam. I've got the evidence. Now we need to act fast before they do any more damage." Rick didn't hesitate. "I'll call on the team. This ends now." I couldn't afford to wait any longer. The HOA's corruption had gone on long enough, and the fake police force they had hired to intimidate homeowners needed to be exposed. With the evidence I had gathered, photos, security footage, documents detailing fraudulent property deals, it was time to take action. The next morning, I called the local sheriff's department and met with the lead investigator, Deputy Morales. I laid out everything I had, showing her the surveillance footage of the fake police planting evidence on my fence, the forged documents, and the trail of fraudulent property sales linked to the HOA's shady dealings. I could see her eyes widen as she pieced it all together. "This is a hell of a case," Morales said after reviewing the evidence. "I'm calling in the team. We'll raid their office, arrest the enforcers, and stop this operation cold." I felt a surge of relief. I had done everything I could to expose the fraud, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. The HOA had deep pockets and connections. They wouldn't go down without a fight. But with law enforcement now on my side, I knew we had the muscle to take them down. As we prepared for the raid, I met with Rick and my other trusted contacts, making sure we were all aligned. We needed to be meticulous. Every detail had to be documented, and we couldn't let any of the fake police or HOA representatives slip through our fingers. By midday, the sheriff's team was in position, and I stood alongside them, ready to do what was necessary. The door to the HOA office was about to be kicked in, and everything would change. The truth would be out. The operation moved swiftly. As soon as the sheriff's team hit the ground, everything unfolded with military precision. We stormed the HOA office, where the fake police officers were based. The office, which had once appeared to be a legitimate neighborhood resource, now felt like the heart of a criminal empire. It was clear that the HOA had been using it as a front for their illegal activities. I watched as Deputy Morales and the team kicked down the door, entering the office with rifles raised. The office staff members of the HOA board and a few hired enforcers were caught off guard. The looks on their faces were a mix of confusion and panic as they were detained and read their rights. "Everyone, hands behind your back," one of the deputies shouted. I stepped in alongside the deputies, watching as the scene unfolded. We moved quickly, going through drawers, cabinet, and filing systems. It wasn't long before we uncovered the full extent of the corruption. Files with forged property deeds, lists of homeowners who had been targeted for violation schemes, and spreadsheets detailing illegal transactions flooded the desks. One of the fake officers who had harassed me was in the back, attempting to hide behind a desk. He didn't get far before the deputies grabbed him and cuffed him. As he struggled, I stepped forward. "I've been waiting for this moment," I said coldly. "You think you can intimidate people and get away with it?" The man shot me a look of pure defiance, but it was clear that the game was up. To help the deputies search through the documents, I found even more evidence that linked the HOA's fake enforcement to a larger real estate syndicate. They had been buying properties under false pretenses and flipping them to developers who had ties to the HOA's higher-ups. It was a well-oiled machine, all built on fraud and intimidation. We even found a list of other victims, people who had been pressured into selling their homes or paying fines they didn't know, all part of the larger scheme. The realization hit me like a punch in the gut. This wasn't just about my property. There were dozens of families who had been victimized by this corrupt system. It was only by sheer luck that I had been able to fight back. As we began processing the evidence, the weight of everything I had uncovered settled in. The fake police, the tampered evidence, the fraudulent transactions, it was all part of a massive operation that had been going on for years. But it wasn't over yet. Now that we had the evidence, it was time to dismantle the network. The arrest of the HOA enforcers and the board members was just the beginning. The real investigation was about to begin. The raid on the HOA office had been a success, but it quickly became clear that this wasn't just a case of rogue enforcers. As we sifted through the mountains of evidence, it became obvious that there was a mastermind behind this operation, someone with far more power and resources than the fake police officers we had arrested. The deeper we dug, the more we realized the HOA was merely a tool in a much larger, more sophisticated scheme. The mastermind wasn't Karen Whitaker, the HOA president, as I had initially thought. She had been just a figurehead. The true mastermind was someone much more influential, someone who had been pulling strings from behind the scenes, a wealthy developer named Richard Hensley. Hensley had been quietly buying up properties for years, using the HOA as a front to pressure homeowners into selling their land at a fraction of its real value. He had set up a complex network of corrupt real estate deals, shady contractors, and even a fake police force to intimidate those who stood in his way. The tampered evidence, the fabricated violations, all of it led straight back to him. I was determined to confront him directly. He couldn't hide behind his network of enforcers anymore. It was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. I worked with Deputy Morales and the team to set up a meeting with Hensley. We needed to make sure he couldn't escape. Using the information we had gathered, we tracked his movements and set up an undercover sting. We weren't just going to arrest him. We were going to make sure he understood that his days of manipulating the system were over. The day of the confrontation, I waited in the back of the sheriff's SUV, watching as Hensley's sleek black car pulled into the parking lot of his high-rise office. I could feel the tension building in my chest. This was the moment we had all been working toward. The corrupt empire he had built was about to come crashing down. When Hensley stepped out of his car, he looked every bit the part of the smooth-talking developer, well-dressed, confident, and completely unaware that his entire operation was about to be exposed. He walked toward the building, oblivious to the fact that law enforcement was waiting just around the corner. I gave the signal, and we moved in fast. As we moved in on Richard Hensley, I couldn't help but feel a rush of anticipation. This was the man who had masterminded the entire fraudulent operation. He had orchestrated the fake police, the intimidation, the lies. He had ruined lives for profit, and now he was about to face the consequences. Deputy Morales and the team surrounded him, blocking his escape route. Hensley froze when he saw us approach, but he didn't seem to be panicked. Instead, he straightened his suit and tried to play the role of the powerful developer, attempting to brush us off with a smirk. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he said smoothly, looking each of us over. "I'm Richard Hensley. I can make your lives very difficult, starting right now." I stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. "No, Mr. Hensley, it's you who's about to find out how difficult things can get. You've been running a criminal operation under the guise of a homeowners association. You've been using fake enforcers to intimidate residents and force them to sell their homes. It ends today." His confident demeanor faltered for just a second, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind as he tried to figure out how much we knew. He was calculating his next move, but it was already too late. "We've got all the evidence we need," I continued, my voice steady. "We know about the tampered documents, the forged deeds, the falsified violations. Your entire network is crumbling around you, and there's nowhere left for you to hide." Hensley's face hardened. "You think you can bring me down with a few flimsy accusations? I've got more power than you'll ever understand." "You had power," Deputy Morales chimed in. "But you've been caught, and now you're going to face the full weight of the law. This isn't just a property dispute. It's fraud, conspiracy, and more. And we're going to make sure you answer for every single part of it." The arrogance that had once radiated from Hensley's posture began to slip away as the full scope of what was happening sank in. His empire of corruption was being dismantled, and there was no escaping the consequences now. "Put your hands behind your back," Morales ordered, and with that, the man who had been controlling everything was cuffed, his business empire collapsing around him. As he was led away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice being served. Hensley might have thought he was untouchable, but he had underestimated the resolve of those who weren't willing to be intimidated. The HOA's corrupt system, the fake enforcers, the real estate scams, it was all about to be exposed. This was the beginning of the end for the crooked operation he had built. With Richard Hensley in custody, the pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. As we moved forward with the investigation, more arrests followed. The fake police officers, the corrupt HOA board members, and even some of the contractors involved in the fraudulent property deals were rounded up. It was becoming clear that the HOA was just the tip of the iceberg. What had seemed like a small local issue was now a massive operation with deep ties to organized crime and corrupt business dealings. I spent the next several days working with Deputy Morales and the rest of the team to go through the evidence we had seized from Hensley's office. The more we uncovered, the more shocked I became. The scale of the operation was staggering. Hensley and his partners had been manipulating property values, using fake inspections and bogus violations to pressure homeowners into selling their properties for a fraction of their worth. They had targeted dozens of families, using intimidation tactics and falsifying legal documents to clear the way for developers. It wasn't just about real estate, it was about power. They had been systematically taking control of neighborhoods, pushing people out, and flipping the land for huge profits, all while hiding behind the facade of a legitimate homeowners association. But the worst part wasn't just the fraud. As we dug deeper, we discovered that some of the HOA's so-called compliance officers had even been involved in violent tactics. They had used threats of physical harm to force residents into signing over their properties, and some of the more vulnerable homeowners had been scared into leaving their homes without any legal recourse. The community had been victimized for years, and it felt like a weight was finally being lifted. But there was still more work to be done. The arrests were only the beginning. The true extent of the operation was so vast that it would take weeks to process all the evidence and get to the bottom of who had been financing and orchestrating the entire scam. I worked with the authorities, ensuring every document, every piece of evidence was cataloged. We filed civil suits against the HOA and the developers involved, and as the news spread, people who had been too afraid to speak out came forward. The tide was turning, and the truth was coming to light. It wasn't just about one man or one corrupt organization anymore. It was about exposing a system that had been in place for far too long and restoring the lives of the people they had harmed. As I looked over the evidence one last time, I felt a sense of closure. I had stood up to the HOA's fake police, uncovered their manipulation, and helped bring down one of the biggest scams the community had ever seen. But this was just the beginning of real justice for those who had suffered. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. News outlets picked up the story of the fake HOA police, and it became a local sensation. The community, once gripped by fear and intimidation, was now filled with a renewed sense of hope. People who had been too afraid to speak out now stood tall, knowing that the corrupt system that had been holding them down was finally crumbling. As the arrests and investigations continued, I worked closely with the authorities to ensure that all the perpetrators were held accountable. The corrupt HOA members and their partners in crime were indicted for fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of power. The fake officers, who had once intimidated residents with impunity, now faced criminal charges for their involvement in the scheme. Even some of the developers who had been in on the scam were arrested for their role in using fraudulent tactics to acquire properties. But the victory wasn't just about taking down a corrupt system. It was about giving the community its power back. The truth had been exposed, and now the hard work of rebuilding began. I helped organize a series of town hall meetings, where residents could come together to discuss their experiences and share their stories. Many of them had been living in fear for years, unsure of who to trust or how to fight back against the HOA. Now they had the chance to be heard. We worked with legal aid groups to provide support to homeowners who had been threatened or forced into selling their homes under duress. We filed lawsuits to reclaim properties that had been unfairly acquired, and slowly, the neighborhood began to heal. As for me, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that I had played a part in bringing down the operation and helping the community rebuild. My job as a crime scene investigator had always been about finding the truth, no matter how hidden it was. But this case had been different. It had been personal. It had been about protecting the people who couldn't protect themselves and standing up to a corrupt system that had tried to break them. One evening, as I stood on my front porch, looking out at the neighborhood that had once been under the thumb of the HO, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The fight had been long, but it had been worth it. The community was stronger now, united by the truth, and I could finally let out the breath I had been holding since this all began. The HOA was gone, the fake police were arrested, and the neighborhood was free. It was a victory not just for me, but for every person who had been wronged by the system. The power had shifted back into the hands of the people, and that was the greatest victory of all.